Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are enjoying the fact that the Baltimore Ravens are 7-2, and certainly the Orioles going to have some off-season things happening at some point here. But full focus this week with team playing 2 games at home on Sunday and again next Thursday. Division games against, I don't know if they're ascending teams, but they're certainly improving teams. We're trying to improve things around here. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour is back on the road about a dozen times between now and Christmas. We're going to start the party where we probably should start it, right down in Lexington Market, where they've been doing it since 1887 with our friends at Fadley Seafood. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I'll have these Ravens scratch-offs to give away. Been a lucky batch for us thus far, and it's going to be even a luckier batch as we get into this. I guess I'm going to get those gingerbread and peppermint scratch and sniff scratch-offs to give away at some point when we get into December. But in the meantime, going to be at Fadley's this week. Going to be at Costas next week. We're going to be at State Fair later in the month. We're going to be at Coco's later in the month. We're going to try for the very first time the Gertrude's Crab Cake over at the BMA with Dan Rodricks to advance his big night and big play. Baltimore, you have no idea. So lots and lots of great things going on. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation, 866-90Nation. You buy 2, you get 2 free, 5 years, 0% financing. And our newest sponsor for the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, right around the corner from you. More than an oil change, but they're there to help you with all sorts of things, including my oil change, my little orange light going on a couple weeks ago down on Merritt Boulevard. Luke Jones is out in Owings Mills. He'll be swooping in for practices this week. And I mean, if there's one thing having Harbaugh around and you see these veteran coaches, Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin, certainly know how to deal with short turnarounds, these long trips to London, getting back from Arizona and being pretty spry against the Seahawks. The Seahawks getting out of bed and looking like they wanted to go back to bed on Sunday morning. Luke, this is meat and potatoes of the season here, and the Ravens are going to be favored this week. They're going to be favored next week. They're that team, right? But when you win 37-3 and you start winning games like this and you're 7-2, Tony Romo and Jim Nantz are anointing you Super Bowl contenders and favorites, and Aaron Schatz was on the air this week, one of your favorites. He was on last week before 37-3 and said the Ravens should be the Super Bowl favorite, that they are statistically in his world, and now they're healthy. Real good time for the Browns to be coming in from our perspective, maybe not from their perspective, because they look like they may have it together, and I can promise you this. Cincinnati has it together. I don't know whether short rest is going to affect them or how it's going to work out, but the Ravens have proven a lot, right? I mean, over the course of time, we're all very enamored with them and bringing them their flowers, not even their Zay flowers today. But boy, these next 8 weeks, they got a real half a season. And when you look at the quarterbacks they're playing, the travel they're going to do, 2 trips to the West Coast, holiday games, it's a good thing they're healthy. They're going to need it.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, and I'll also mention this as well. Cincinnati have among the very toughest schedules that you're going to find in the NFL the rest of the way. I mean, it bears out. Look at the Ravens' remaining schedule: Cleveland, Cincinnati, at Los Angeles, going out there playing a Chargers team that at times looks good, other times not so good. So you don't really know what you're going to get. The Rams, I think some of the mojo they had going has kind of gone by the wayside. A team that's dealing with injuries themselves, and who knows what the status is going to be for Matthew Stafford at that point. But at Jacksonville, challenging. At San Francisco, which their recent struggles aside, the 49ers game, that might be the only game left on the schedule where I could see the Ravens, assuming nothing strange from a health injury standpoint, that might be the only game left on the schedule where the Ravens could be the underdog. I think they're going to be favored in just about every other game the rest of the way. So it just speaks to where they've been. It speaks to how impressive it's been here recently. And at the same time, those games I just reeled off, and then they finish up home against Miami. Dolphins, they've got an offense with a lot of speed. Still wondering if that team is able to rise to the occasion against another good team, and they haven't been to this point, but still a lot of talent there. And then home against Pittsburgh to close out the regular season. It's not an easy schedule. I mean, the Rams at home feels like the closest thing to a layup in the second half of the season. And, even the Rams at times, and again, maybe a little bit earlier in the season, they looked okay at times. So it's not an easy schedule. But the good news is, when I say that, this is a Ravens team that's playing some of the very best football in the NFL. As I said in a previous conversation, I'm still calling Kansas City as the team to beat in the AFC until someone does it, because they've earned that for the last 3 or 4 years now. But there's not a team in football playing better than the Baltimore Ravens right now. So, you look at the point differential, you look at how the defense is playing at such an elite level, the offense still wanting to see more consistency, but still playing at a high level for large chunks of time. I've officially entered that territory, Nestor, where we were in 2019, where I said as that year went on, I wasn't going to pick against the Ravens again until they give me a reason to pick against them. And we've officially reached that mark. I'm picking them to beat Cleveland. I'm going to pick them to beat Cincinnati. I'm going to pick them to beat the Chargers. I mean, go down the list. I think they're going to lose another game or two at some point, because that's just how this league is. And we know that just because you're playing great right now doesn't mean you will be a month from now. Buffalo is a great example of that when you look at how the Bills looked in late September compared to where they are right now. But this is a really, really good football team. And as we've said throughout our conversations in the wake of this big win over the Seahawks, it still feels like they can get better too. And I think that's what's really exciting about this thing, assuming you can stay healthy, which is a big assumption, but it's the same one that every team in the league deals with, right? You're a couple injuries away from not feeling so great anymore. But where the Ravens stand right now, how can you not be impressed with what this team is doing on both sides of the football?
I think the level of competition and what we're going to see is certainly going to be different from the quarterbacking perspective. And you and I you go out to Baltimore Positive and hear Luke and I talk about the defense, the offense. We've given equal praise for a 7-2 team that, quite frankly, could have been a 9-0 team or an 8-1 team. You look at the Indianapolis game or the Pittsburgh game, it's not like they've ever rolled the ball out there this year and not shown up. And that's how John Harbaugh keeps his job. And that's how Eric DeCosta keeps his job, bringing in these kinds of players that we can sit here in early November, be a really good, healthy football team and say, this is a Super Bowl contender. Not every team gets to say that for 1 hour a year, let alone gets to say that for 9 months. And then in the 10th and 11th month, they actually go out and do it. And that's part of Harbaugh's post-game speech on Sunday was, you're doing what we're coaching you to do, what we believed you could do. I don't want to say peaking too early or any of that jargon, sports writer jargon, but there is a lot of season left. And for you to have an expectation they're going to lose 1 or 2, I'll hear that. You threw that out. They're going to lose 1 or 2 more. I'll give them 2. They lose 2 more. They go 6-2 the rest of the way. They're 13-4. I don't know if that's a 1 seed, but it's certainly a 2 seed, right? I mean, 13-4. I don't know where Kansas City's going to be, but Buffalo's not coming. I mean, Cincinnati would really have to be, given their schedule and given the Ravens' schedule. But if they lose 2 more games the rest of the way and they get through this, what are the 2 games they're going to lose? They're going to go to Jacksonville and win. They're going to go to San Francisco and win. They're going to go to LA and win. They're going to beat Cincinnati here on short rest, and they're going to just take care of business. Pittsburgh. I mean, they have games left, right? So I look at this and say, if they only lose 2 more the rest of the way, even if they don't play great against Jacksonville and win on a 58-yard field goal in the end because it's nice down there or whatever, I'll hear all of that. If they go 6-2 the rest of the way, it would be a lot more impressive than being 7-2 to me right now, especially given the age of some of their players, the fact that they do have to bubble wrap their quarterback. Their whole season is in their quarterback. Not that it's not that way everywhere, but it's specifically that way here. And he did have a gimp moment with Bobby Wagner, and reporters were asking John Harbaugh, who had to defer to Lamar. But I have a feeling Lamar is probably a little sore today, and I don't know what that means for his game. But the running part of his game, that's not the whole game anymore, right? And that's where they really need to be as they go into this, that they don't need to think about going to Jacksonville and having Lamar run the ball 14 times for 98 yards and having to get loose twice because they're behind by 13 points. And that's the way they can get the ball down the field. I think we all start to see these weapons and what they're trying to do with the offense and running Lamar less And Sunday was a great example of that, other than him getting brought down by Bobby Wagner, and that wasn't a good thing. I know one time he wasn't going to get hurt in the fourth quarter because he wasn't on the field.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's all about diversifying the portfolio, right? You want to be able to do multiple things to win football games, and that's always been my point in talking about the passing game and wanting to improve that passing game. But I just want to go back to when I made the comment that I expect that they're going to lose a couple more games. That's not at all to say that they're assured to go to run the table or go 7-1. I mean, this is a challenging schedule the rest of the way. I'm just saying on a week-to-week basis, when you look at these matchups, you look at how the Ravens have performed compared to how these other teams have performed. And look, Cleveland, I think the Browns are low-key kind of good if they can get even just okay play from Deshaun Watson. I mean, they were winning games with P.J. Walker, at quarterback. Even though I think the Ravens defense is better than Cleveland's defense, that's still a really good defense. So that's not a team that, I'm not at all viewing that as a layup. They've got to go out and play good football on Sunday. Cincinnati playing way better. Go down the list. I mentioned the Chargers. Which Chargers team shows up? The Chargers at times look like a legit playoff caliber team, and other times not so much. And that's kind of been their story for a number of years now. But, I mentioned the Rams. That's the game right now that, okay, the Rams are some of their early successes that were maybe a little surprising considering we thought that they were in kind of this rebuild mode. It feels like that's going away at this point. Kind of like we talked about that with the Cardinals a couple weeks ago when the Ravens were going in there to play. But, Jacksonville, good team. San Francisco, I still think is a great team, or a really good team. I think they're going to figure things out, with some of their recent injuries and recent struggles. Miami, the talent's there on offense. I mean, the speed is scary. Just that, they haven't shown up the way they need to against good teams. And Pittsburgh, that's the game. Who knows, right? I mean, I don't think the Steelers are very good, but their record says that they're a playoff team. They're the number 5 seed.
It reminds me a little bit of some of the Billick years where you'd look and you'd be like, I don't really think the team's any good, but I don't know. They're 6-3. They're 7-4. They're winning.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Mike Tomlin teams have become in recent years. Even at the end of the Roethlisberger era, it's become that. So, look, if the Ravens get a couple injuries or they start, they revert to that mode where they're letting teams back in games and not finishing strong and, hey, do what they did against Arizona last week, except it's against a better team. They'll lose some more games. There's no doubt about that if they do those things. But if they continue to build on what they've done over the last few weeks, my point is all of those teams I just laid out on the schedule, challenging as some of them might look on paper, all of those teams right now are saying, oh boy, you've got the Ravens this week. Have you seen how they've been playing of late? And that's my point with where this team is right now. But it's always, it's week to week. It's matchup driven. It's so dependent on who's healthy and who's not any given week. So it's a long way to go. And there are plenty of potential pitfalls remaining on that schedule. My point is just looking at them on paper, matchup to matchup, it's tough to look at that and say that the Ravens are going to be an underdog in the eyes of Vegas too often moving forward, assuming they stay relatively healthy here. And that's a good place to be. That's really exciting. And again, it gets back into that territory they were in 4 years ago when they, reeled off 12 wins in a row to close the regular season and number 1 seed. And we were talking about an AFC championship game in Baltimore until, the Tennessee Titans unfortunately showed up.
Well, the one thing about Cleveland and Cincinnati is I think we're going to be in football games here the next 2 weeks. Yeah. I wouldn't have said that Detroit or Seattle, that if it gets out of hand, it gets out of hand. I almost picked the game out of hand on Sunday. I mean, I almost picked a 37-3 like that, but I didn't because I really want to respect the defense, but I want to see them continue to do this against legitimate starting quarterback. Geno Smith, legitimate starting quarterback. Jared Goff, legitimate starting quarterback. I think then there's elite quarterbacks and there are elite teams, and you think of the 49ers defense as being involved, and certainly a different kind of offense for what they've done with Brock Purdy since Garoppolo left. Those NFC weird matchups and the Rams and they see the Dolphins a little more often, some of these AFC teams. But Jim Schwartz, I mean, he circles this ish on the calendar, dude. I know my boy. He's over in Arbutus. Mm-hmm. He's got a number 1 defense. Your defense, my my players, Myles Garrett, making a case to be the best defensive player in the league at this point. So it's Roquan Smith, right? Different position, different impact. But this is statement stuff for the Browns, who can never get out of their own way and at least are on the positive side of the ledger. They have their quarterback. They just shut a team out. I don't think you ever get a whole lot of confidence when you're a Browns fan, but I do think there are reasons to believe at 3:30 on Sunday this is going to be 20-13, 17-13. It's going to be one of those kind of division games that the Ravens are going to find themselves in a close game. Didn't handle that well against Indianapolis. Didn't handle that well against Pittsburgh, right? And when the games are in the balance, to your point, finishing 37-3, it smelled really good the last 2 weeks. If you've driven your car down to the parking lot H and you've gone in and you leave laughing in the fourth quarter, there are going to be some slobber knockers. I figure these next two, and especially the Thursday night game, which is always just awful all the way around, and for Cincinnati as well. This is an interesting couple days of football because we're kissing their ass right now, but God forbid they wake up next Friday 7-4, right?
Yeah, I mean, but things can also turn that quickly. I made mention of the Bills who, at the end of September, it looked like their season opening, that Monday night loss where Rodgers gets hurt on the fourth play of the game, whatever it was. That was in the rearview mirror. The Bills were rolling. They had blown out, 3 straight blowout wins, and we see how that's gone for them since then. So things can change very quickly. I think what's interesting for me, and we've talked about this element a lot because obviously I'm a baseball guy, the whole element of facing a pitcher the second time, third time through the order. This will be the first time that a team has gone up against the Todd Monken Ravens offense for a second time. So what adjustments has Cleveland made? And we look at that final score, and look, so much was made about Cleveland's quarterback situation with DTR. And I mean, he had no clue what he was doing out there. That was evident because they benched him the following week and they made PJ Walker the quarterback with Watson out. But the 28-3 final score didn't really reflect how Cleveland's defense played for large stretches of that game. It was really the second quarter where the Ravens really got to them and really moved the ball. Other than that, they didn't move the ball much. The rest of the game, it was a grind, and they couldn't really run the ball the way that they would have wanted to in the second half. And that's something that we kind of forget because the final score and they won and all that. And that was great, especially on the road. But I am going to be interested to see how the Cleveland defense fares against them second time around against the Monken offense, seeing Lamar for the second time this year. And that's not to say that they're going to shut them down. Just makes this matchup that much more intriguing. And on the flip side, the Ravens, well, I'm certainly not expecting Deshaun Watson to have a banner day against them. I'm not picking any quarterback to have a huge day against them, their defense at this point in time. But you would think they'd be better equipped to have a little more success than they did the last time around, which is a pretty low bar. So,
the Browns have had their running game greatly affected.
Yeah. I mean, you don't lose a Nick Chubb. I mean, we've talked about Dobbins here, right? I mean, Nick Chubb's been one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in football over the last 5 years. You lose that guy early in the season, it's going to take you a while to figure it out. And it's not as though they haven't made it work, but how is their offense going to perform in Baltimore against this defense that is playing at such an elite level? It's a division game. It's as simple as that, right? I mean, it's not quite as extreme as throwing out the numbers. It doesn't feel as weird as Ravens Steelers has felt over the last couple years where, again, you wonder how Pittsburgh's going to score, and yet they hang around, and the Ravens have given up. The last 2 times they played, they've given up a last-minute touchdown and lost as a result. So it's not quite in that territory, but still a division opponent. It's still a Browns team that, again, I think is pretty good. I mean, be the number 6 seed in the AFC right now. We're talking about an AFC North. While I think the Ravens have very much earned the right to call themselves the best team in the division, in an AFC North where the other 3 teams they're the 3 wild cards right now. I mean, it's crazy. 9 weeks into the season to be talking about that, but it speaks to how much of a challenge still lies ahead for them. So the good news is they put themselves in the kind of position that even if they were to drop one of these 2, they're still in excellent shape. But to your point, you don't want to be looking, you don't want to be smelling yourself too much, right? You don't want to be feeling too good about yourself because you could look up, as you mentioned, a week from Friday and suddenly you're 7-4. And dare I say, if you're 7-4, what does that mean? Are you in third place? Are you in fourth place suddenly in the division? I mean, that's how crazy this AFC North is right now. So they can't be looking past making any assumptions, anything like that. Cleveland's going to come in and give them everything they can handle, especially talking about that Browns defense. And then after that, rematch with Cincinnati. And I mean, it's a Bengals team that, boy, they looked, and we were, you and I debated this, whether they were dead and how much trouble they were in at 1-3, but boy, they've gotten themselves off the mat and they have a very difficult second half schedule, just like the Ravens, but they're looking a lot better. So Thursday night,
They've won these big games, though. They've gone to a Super Bowl.
they have.
They've gone and won big games. They've won on the road. They've slayed
Yeah.
the Giant. They've beaten Mahomes. They just beat the snot out of Buffalo again. The fan base is all wound up. My wife's like, are those empty seats? I'm like, no, no, no. They're doing like a stripe thing, and there's like 28 Bills fans in the whole stadium in blue because their tickets are $300. The Bengals have, and it's hard for me. And since Chad threw me out, I don't go there anymore. But I went there for 28 years. And even when the Carson Palmer thing was happening and an Andy Dalton thing was happening or whatever, there was never enthusiasm for their brand and for their team. That Super Bowl and what I witnessed out in LA, which feels like 5 minutes ago, Odell Beckham probably feels like it's longer. But, I saw that out there and I kind of almost laughed at the Zubaz and all of that. But the Bengals are like a real thing and some real energy off of what they've done. I'm worried more about them than I am the Browns, and I'm worried about the Browns, and now I'm worried about both of them. And I think the Ravens are playing so well that everybody else is smelling them. And I don't know that it's great to be playing that well on Halloween, but it's great to be healthy. But you're seeing two teams here that are ascending. Like literally, they are ascending. They're playing their best football right now, despite the fact that Cleveland does have its running back. We don't have our running back either. We can all talk about guys that are missing. But I'm looking at these two games and saying, boy, this is the 10 most important days of the season. They're always the next 10 days, right? Harbaugh would say, but
sure.
Oh boy, these two games here, you get through these on the right side and you're 9-2. Then you can talk about all that Tony Romo talked about in our first AFC championship game at home. We're going to make the Chiefs come here. But then you still got to go to San Francisco and win. You got to go out to LA. You got to have LA come here. You got Miami coming in. You got real quarterbacks, real offenses coming in that's going to give this defense a chance to lead the league in sacks, a chance for Matabike and for Patrick Queen and Geno Stone to get paid further because, look, it smells great, and we're at the halfway point plus 2 quarters. Man, they're going to be hard pressed to play this well the next 8. Right? Like as well as they've played on both sides of the ball and escape. And they didn't even escape Indianapolis and Pittsburgh. Tight games. That worries me. They're in a 16-13 game in the fourth quarter, and they're one mistake away from blowing it, one ball going over their head, one fumble, one something. That's not the position I want to see this football team in. I like it a whole lot more. I want to echo our Oriole reporter in saying the Ravens need more blowouts. They need more blowouts, Luke.
Well, as we said during baseball season, easier said than done, right? I mean, what they did against Detroit is not easy to do. And even with them repeating that from a final score standpoint, it's not as though the Ravens came out and scored touchdowns on their first 4 drives on Sunday. That's why, to me, and I didn't talk about this too much, but I wrote about this at BaltimorePositive.com. I mean, for me, the really telling moment in the game on Sunday was the way that the defense handled that sudden change at the end of the first half. When Beckham fumbles the ball there, Seattle has 2 timeouts. They're at the 41, 42-yard line, whatever it was. They've got a chance to make it 14-10 at halftime. And you're going in and thinking, wow, they kind of felt like they controlled that game in the first half for the most part. And they're only up 4 points. That would have been kind of deflating, I think. That could have led to a different second half. And instead, Travis Jones bats down a pass. Kyle Van Noy sack, Kyle Van Noy strip sack, recovery. Suddenly you have the ball in Justin Tucker territory with just a few yards, and they kick a field goal and they go up 17-3. I mean, that was the stuff of a championship caliber defense right there, where you say, you know what? The offense stubbed its toe. They messed up. No problem. we're not just going to make a stop here, but we're going to stop them, send them backwards, and we're going to get the ball back, and you're going to score. You're going to score that field goal you were trying to score before Beckham fumbled the ball. So,
and they're going to feel even worse about themselves at halftime.
Exactly. I mean, that was so demoralizing. And then we saw Gus Edwards come out and run for 42 yards, and it was all over. The route was on at that point in time. But to get back to what you said, look, you and I have the luxury of sitting here, and I can already read the Facebook comments right now on the video that you're going to post of this. You guys are looking ahead. Take it 1 week at a time. Well, we don't play. We can look ahead. If you're John Harbaugh and if you're Mike McDonald, if you're Todd Monken, if you're Roquan Smith, if you're Lamar Jackson, if you're Mark Andrews, go down the list. Kyle Van Noy, Jadeveon Clowney, all the veterans on this team, Kevin Zeitler. You're focused on Cleveland and Cleveland alone. Okay, yeah, there's some different things that you're going to do in terms of taking care of your body because you have the Cincinnati game 4 days after that. So, John's probably going to have them on a little bit of a lighter on-field schedule this week, doing some things just to get them off their feet, keep them fresh, knowing they have 2 games in a 5-day period against division rivals.
And you're not going to get to practice much before the Cincinnati games. Right. It's a good thing that their practice is perfect, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you want to be fine, but you don't want to push these guys too hard right now. And that's why in recent weeks, and John's even been asked about this, they've had walkthroughs on Fridays. They've practiced without helmets so the last couple Fridays, and that's not going to be a rest of the year thing, but that's because of this stretch coming up. And the good news for them, as we said, if they can get to 9-2 and they've got the Chargers game to go and then their bye week, I mean, boy, it sets up for them to have a really fun and exciting month of December if you can do that. But the Ravens themselves, all those players I just mentioned, all those coaches I just mentioned, the singular focus is on Cleveland right now because it can go the other way very quickly here because you are going up against quality football teams. And
all three of these teams are wild card teams right now. They're not just thinking they're in, they're thinking of turning the lights out in Baltimore, right? Like they're not playing for their lives. They believe they're good because their records all say they're good. This is a different version of the division than we've seen, right? We're talking about Pittsburgh, poor little Pittsburgh. They're winning as much as anybody. And who knows what we're going to see by the time we get, to that period of time. But this version of Cleveland, this is a formidable version of Cleveland right now. A much more formidable version of Cleveland than we saw 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, 2020, the Browns were pretty good that year, right? And made the playoffs, beat Pittsburgh. I mean, so it's not as though they haven't been decent at all, but yeah, it's a good team. If you want me to stack these teams in terms of power rankings, in terms of thinking who I think is a more serious contender, yeah, it's the Ravens and the Bengals, and I am going to put the Browns and the Steelers in that, a step below, but it's not dramatic. And look, the record says what they are. These are wild card teams right now. So you've got to go out there and handle your business. And we know it's different in the division. Even if you're talking about a division opponent coming into Baltimore, we know that is a different animal than facing Detroit, who you typically see once every 4 years. I know they played 2 years ago, but you get my point. And Seattle, who you see every 4 years. I mean, there's a lack of familiarity with Lamar Jackson in this offense that I continue to say, and that's not a knock on the Ravens. It's an advantage that they have in the same way that if you're an American League team facing a National League pitcher who throws 100 with a wicked slider and you only see that guy once every few years or however it plays out. And I know the schedule's different now, but you understand my point. That's different. There's a novelty to it that you're just not ready for. These division opponents, they know Lamar really well. They know the Ravens really well. And the Ravens know them very well too. So it really does come down to focusing on Sunday's task against the Browns because I'll continue to say, as much as Deshaun Watson, there's disdain and deserved disdain for him and a lot of criticism about his play. I mean, he has not been very good for them, period. End of story. He hasn't, but he is better than the quarterback they encountered when they went there back in week 4. So how's that going to go? How's it going to go against this Cleveland defense that is now seeing the Ravens for a second time? So, I think they have to be prepared for a close football game, for a tough Browns team coming in. And I'm going to pick the Ravens to win. Like I said, I'm not picking against the Ravens again until they do something that makes me feel like they deserve to be picked against, quite frankly, like they did earlier in the year against Indy and Pittsburgh, but they certainly cannot be looking past anyone. They certainly cannot be feeling too good about themselves in the sense of, hey, hey, look at us. We're 7-2. We're tied with Kansas City atop the AFC. You start thinking in those terms, you start looking ahead. That's when you're going to get your feelings hurt by the Browns, who, again, where do they rank? Do I think the Browns are a serious Super Bowl contender? No, I don't. I just don't. But are they a legitimate playoff caliber kind of contender? Absolutely, with that defense. So you better be ready to buckle it up on Sunday and be ready for a physical football game.
Well, I'm going to have all my picks later this week. I was a little sluggish this week, but I began the week 12 over 500. Right now, I'm 1 under for the week, but we'll see if we can get some help on Monday night from the Jets. But a full week ahead and a full slate ahead here. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, taking it out on the road. We are beginning on Friday at Fadley's. I'm also emceeing the American Cancer Foundation's event on Thursday night down at the Museum of Industry. So big week around here, lots of things going on, but Ravens 5.5-point favorites when I get together with Christian Horton from Hollywood Casino. We're picking the winners, and we're going to be up at Hollywood Casino as part of our Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation, as well as Jiffy Lube Multicare. Fadley's this week, Costas next week. We're going to Coco's. We're going back to Pappas, this time in Parkville. We're going to be at Gertrude's at the BMA later on in the month. I'm going to be with Governor Wes Moore down in Annapolis later on this month, and we're also going to be kicking it back over to Catonsville and State Fair in the early part of December. Plenty of holidays ahead, plenty of eggnog. They got pumpkin spice left over. We got things happening here, and a 7-2 football team. Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke anywhere social media follows. You can follow him out to Owings Mills here this week as we get ready for the Jim Schwartz-led defense of the Cleveland Browns and a quick turnaround against the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday night. Moment of silence for the career of Joey Votto as I watched the little Cincinnati action there the other night. I miss going to Cincinnati, but I don't miss the chili. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore, positive, and chilly in Cincinnati.